It was a night, and there was a whole line of people frantically throwing sandbag after sandbag after sandbag on top of each other. And all of them were absolutely soaked to the bone. And I want you to imagine like probably the worst rainstorm you've ever seen. Like the kind that makes you go over to your window, pull out your camera, and go, holy shit, I wonder if we're gonna be okay. That kind of a storm. They were racing, put up these sandbags to help prevent the Rue River from absolutely decimating the town below. And so far, they were winning. I mean, of course they would be. Like, we have this under control, right? This is, after all, one of the biggest dams in China. Of course, everything's gonna be okay. All we gotta do is just throw in a couple extra sandbags. Millions of people were lying, sleeping just downstream. And these people had been working pretty much throughout the entire night. It was just at 1 a.m. when the sky started to finally clear. The stars shone down on them, and the moon finally lit everything. It seemed like things were going to be okay. The storm clouds finally started to dissipate, and everyone kind of took a sigh of relief. Maybe a little bit of laughter. We did it. Everyone's going to be okay. It was eerily calm as someone yelled, "The water level's going down. The flood is retreating. We're gonna be okay." There was a little chance to enjoy that calm. A few seconds later, there was crack. When the whole sky felt like it was collapsing, the earth was crackling beneath them. Of 280,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools burst through the crumbling dam, taking entire towns and as many as 171,000 lives. It shook the very foundations of what we thought was safe, proving when nature pushes back, the consequences can be catastrophic. Hi, and welcome to the Decomposing Flower podcast. We're excited to have you with us as we delve into some truly intriguing and, yes, occasionally disturbing true crime cases. I'm your host, Kira, and with me is Jen. Everything we say in our podcast is information that we have gathered from testimonies, interviews, documents, and trustful sources. Anything we say is our own opinion. If we get any information wrong or mispronounce anything, you can let us know in the comments. Trust me, if I mispronounce something, I probably know it. I mean no disrespect to any victims or anyone affected by this case. Today we're going to be discussing the Bangqiao Dam disaster. Before we get started, I want to give a few trigger warnings. We're just going to be talking about a massive loss of life. So if you're not in the right space or mindset for that, probably check out one of our other episodes. Get yourself a bubble tea, and we'll see you in the next episode. How could something like this happen? The Bangqiao Dam had been built on the Rue River in the early 1950s as a part of a flood prevention and electric production program aimed at controlling the Yellow River. And I don't know if you guys ever did this in high school, but we had whole units talking about the Yellow River and all the things to do with it. It's a massive river, and this dam was no exception. At a height of 387 feet, with a storage capacity of some 492 million cubic meters, it was designed to withstand a 1,000-year flood. So, like, something that you would read in, like, the Bible. Something crazy, something only expected once every millennium, or never. It was supposed to be something that pretty much never happened. However, Typhoon Nina produced floods that were twice the 1,000-year levels. The first day's rain exceeded 40 inches, surpassing the area's total annual rain levels of 1/5. And the following 3 days, even more heavy downpours followed. The construction of the Bangqiao Dam began in April of 1951 and was completed 14 months later. It was part of a larger project to help provide flood control, irrigation, and electrical power to the region. The dam was freaking huge. It was made out of a clay core surrounded by a sand shell and had a structural height of massive. Okay, this thing was like the pride and joy of the government at the time, and it was constructed with the assistance of the Soviet consultants in the years prior to the Great Chinese Leap Forward. And we might do a whole episode on that because There was a lot that happened in this time, but I won't get too far into that. There was pretty severe flooding due to the construction, but shortly after the Bangqiao Dam was completed, cracks were observed in the dam and gates. From 1955 to 1956, it was repaired, reinforced, and raised another 10 feet in accordance with the Soviet construction's specifications. During this rehabilitation, the dam was seen as nearly unbreakable, and everyone called it the Iron Dam. So this is much like the Titanic. Like everyone thought this damn thing would never sink, just like everyone thought this iron dam would never crack. The Bangqiao Dam functioned as intended for nearly 2 decades, which reduced significant downstream flooding and provided irrigation, like we mentioned. It was not without its distractors. Chen Xing was a hydrologist working for the Chinese government who expressed his disagreement with the dam and a bunch of dams actually that happened across China and the whole region. The dam had a pretty big issue. Primarily, it was the source of water and conservation that really caused issues. These reservoirs could raise the local water table and help cultural fields around it, right? However, if one of these dams were to fail, that was a massive source of water that would just be gone. But everyone would just wave them off like, "Oh, it's never gonna happen. You're freaking hilarious for thinking this iron dam is gonna collapse." Actually, in the early 1950s, the Bangqiao Dam would have had a pretty high standard for hazard based on the likelihood of failure or misoperation, which would lead to a probable loss of one or more human lives. Modern dam practices call for high hazard dams to pass an extreme test to see basically how impactful it would be if a rare event occurred. What would be the probability that this dam would survive? And what would be the devastation? Probably due to this event and many others along the way, is why modern dam safety and practices are recorded and well documented. And disasters are tragic if they don't follow the practices put in place. So, back to the dam. So, the government officials in charge of the design were under the common misconception that a 1,000-year event only happens every 1 in 1,000 years. Right? Like, why would it happen more than once, or why would there be anything more significant than this? We're only going to face one disaster every 1,000 of years, and things are going to be okay. So, when the dam experienced a flood of the magnitude the designers considered impossible, they were flabbergasted. Typhoon Nina arrived over the Henan province and released rainfall, approximately 45% of the typical annual precipitation, and a level that made the water reservoirs throughout the entire region, not only this place, increase. They were brought to, in Bangqiao, it brought the maximum water capacity on the first day of the storm. The gates were opened, but they were not able to discharge at their maximum capacity due to the accumulation of silt against the up face of the dam. So already things were not looking so good. And this was only on the first day, mind you. There were still 4 more days of rain before the actual disaster occurred. The Bangqiao Reservoir Management offices located along the rim were also flooded by the rising reservoir levels. This knocked out telephone services and severe contact with all weather stations monitoring the storm, making emergency notifications practically impossible. And to make matters worse, Typhoon Nina also hit a cold front, which caused the storm to stall over this area. So it just rained and rained and rained. And it dropped it for another 3 days, and the water continued to rise. And without the ability to communicate, operators at Bangqiao were unable to receive instructions or inform the government of the conditions on the dam. In addition, the reputation of being the invincible Iron Dam led it to be overlooked when government officials were assessing the dangers regarding the flood. As the water level rised and the embankment began to overtop, workers formed a human chain, attempting to repair the embankment, throwing sandbag over sandbag after sandbag as even the embankment began to erode away. The Bangqiao Dam began overtopping. Approximately at 1 a.m., a flood wave of nearly 500,000 acres moved over 30 miles an hour, which is 44 feet per second, with a depth of 30 feet. It ripped through farms and villages and towns. One worker cried out as the wave passed, "The river dragon has come," which reference to an old folktale. It took approximately 6 hours for the entire reservoir to drain. The failed dam discharged a peak flow, which they recorded at 2.8 million cubic feet per second, which generated a flood that was over 7 miles wide and covered 3 million acres, which is approximately the size of Connecticut. Due to failed communication lines, a warning was not sent out in time to allow an adequate evacuation. Villagers in the immediate vicinity were nearly completely washed away. Since no warning was given, all the residents pretty much perished. Due to many factors, it is impossible to determine an overall fatality rate. However, local estimates are terrifyingly high. In Qinghua village, the fatality rate is estimated at 63%. However, these numbers will never truly be known due to the Chinese government's control over journalism, which even continues to today. The true extent of the damages are never actually captured or publicized, and at all sources, fatality estimates vary. Even the official estimate has changed over time. Officially, China states that 26,000 people died due to the dam's failures in the region. However, this figure fails to consider the indirect fatalities. Immediately following the dam's break, disease and outbreaks broke out all over the region. Famine decimated the area. Remember how this dam held pretty much all of the region's water? Well, all of that region's water was all over 30 million acres, and all of that water was contaminated or filled with dead bodies, and houses and dead livestock were floating in this water. It wasn't safe to drink, let alone help people with their wounds, or it was not a good time. And the crops also were absolutely wiped out. So there wasn't enough food or water to go around. In 1955, a Human Rights Watch cited a total death toll of 230,000. A vast majority of this was probably due to starvation, disease, a lack of water, extreme summer heat, infection of an untreated wounds, because they wouldn't be able to get cars in. They wouldn't be able to get helicopters in for villagers? No, the government wouldn't do that. They wouldn't send boats. They wouldn't. These people were truly alone. And these deaths were not for lack of trying on the Chinese government. They did try to assist the impact of the floods. Food and supplies were airdropped to try to assist the millions left stranded. And it's believed that more than 1 million were still believed to be trapped by flooded conditions after more than a week. But 60 or 50% of the food landed in those murky and contaminated waters, rendering it unsafe to eat if even retrieved. So they tried. Sure, they tried.
That makes me so mad.
Literally, dude. So, due to the censorship, very little was known about what happened. Even China's Ministry of Water, Resources, and Electric Power released a study that stated 85,000 people died instantly due to the flood wave. The rest of the people, oh, that was all due to things not being done, things not helping, and even shockingly, these individuals also estimated that one third of China's dams should also be considered unsafe. And keep in mind, this report was kept confidential until 2005. In the years following the failures of these dams, many failed dams were rebuilt, including Bangshao in 1993. It's unknown if there was any opposition regarding the reconstruction of these dams. However, it seems unlikely that the opposition would have ever stopped the Chinese government's plans for redeveloping these things. China, fun fact, has over 22,000 large dams, which is nearly half the world's total number of dams, which is even surely greater today. In recent terms, tofu construction has become pretty popular, referring to the structures built during these times. As you can guess, with substandard materials and unqualified contractors because of corruption, a lot of these bridges fucking suck, for a lack of a better word. China has had at least 19 major bridges collapse, resulting in over 140 total deaths. And shockingly, in one case, one of these collapsed bridges was actually to have been built by a blind contractor. And this ain't like Ratatouille, y'all. Um,
Yeah, like, wait, what?
this ain't like Ratatouille. Ain't no one can build a bridge, you know? Like not like everyone can cook. I'm sorry, if you're blind, maybe don't build bridges.
Oh my god, like, you were serious when you said blind. Oh my god, that's
I was serious, yeah.
oh my god. I thought that was, like, a term for, like, someone who just doesn't have enough skill. Oh my god.
No, mans was
That
blind.
oh my god.
Actually, one of the most famous bridges in China's high profile kind of dam society. I don't know what else to call it. The Three Georges. There was nearly 100 reported instances of corruption, bribery, and embellishment associated with this project. And people were being displaced and moved around, and there was a lot of resettlement funds just being thrown around. I can't imagine that building a dam should be this confusing. Like, let's get a couple of bricks out there, let's go. But no, need to stick your hands in everything. Good old government. So even though these are the new dams I was just talking about, older dams raise even greater worries, as you can imagine. Thousands that were built prior to the Great Reform and the opening up are still in use and are in bad need of renovation. The central government has said over 40,000 dams are at risk of breach, and it'll take about 62 billion yuan to repair them, but the local governments have been unwilling or unable to make up the difference. So, isn't that lovely? Wouldn't you just love to be in a town in China where there's a bridge or a dam nearby? It sounds super duper safe, right? More recently, a small dam in Xinjiang collapsed, flooding 70 homes and killing one man, which I mean, is horrible, but it just shows that it's still prevalent. And this was in the 2000s, right? When the Bangqiao Dam collapsed, it sent a tidal wave crashing towards the valley below, and it would take out another 62 dams like dominoes. Within minutes, entire villages with thousands of people would be wiped off the map. Just like that, someone's life would end that night. Imagine you're lying in your bed and all of a sudden you're out of it. You're floating around. You don't know where you are. All you hear are screams and cries. Around you, in the water, you manage to climb aboard just a door, a something. You don't even know what you're grabbing onto, but it's keeping you afloat. You're able to breathe amongst getting smacked by wave after wave after wave. You whack into houses, fences, things are stabbing into you. You're being ripped apart, but after the tidal wave dies down, that's when all the voices also die down, leaving you in a deadly silence. During the 6 hours the Bangqiao Dam took to empty, 26,000 people were instantly probably killed, if not more, many of whom were sleeping. Some managed to cling to life by holding onto trees or standing onto rooftops, but many of those who survived the initial onslaught would soon wish they hadn't. Because these villages and roads had gone unmaintained for years and flood diversion zones had been repurposed, the water had nowhere to drain. Roads were washed out, and rescue workers had no way to maneuver to the survivors. These people were left to wait on rooftops or huddled together on small patches of dry land. They stripped tree branches of leaves and ate them, and any floating livestock carcasses, they ate them raw. Like we mentioned, food was airdropped, but many of it fell into the water, was lost, or desperate people ate it after it had rotted. For those people who were stuck on rooftops, disease quickly spread while they battled hunger and the endless summer heat. For every person who had been swept to their death in the initial tsunami, it's estimated at least 5 died from the famine and the plague that followed. And I just want to kind of wrap things up by we talked about how dangerous the dam situation is in China. If one dam falls, it kind of creates this cascading tsunami effect that goes onto the next dam and the next dam and the next dam, which creates a deadly domino effect and collapses pretty much all the dams. And there's massive downstream population centers, especially now in the major rivers. If such a collapse were to occur today, it would be made even more devastating by the chemical industry, which has taken hold along the rivers. Once the chemical plants are flooded, the contamination to the environment would be immeasurable. And not to mention, people would be likely irradiated, and the loss of life would be extraordinary. On those sweeping roads and the steep mountainsides, so many bodies were left floating in the water without any help. The people who survived died from blood loss, shock, exposure. Even though China sent help, their total helicopter fleet is barely 1/1000th the size of the US. And even if people wanted to try, they couldn't be everywhere to help that many people. Compared to the 1970s, safety procedures have definitely improved, but corners are still being cut and the environment has become even riskier. The geography is still risky, with the movement of upstream and climate change just being part of natural risks, and not to mention the absence of an early warning system or an evacuation plan only exaggerated the disaster. Even though the estimated total death toll was more than 220,000, the total number of people affected by the disaster was likely over 10 million. And that's where we're going to leave it for today. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you so much for listening. I hope we explained it with as much factual information as we could. And again, we meant no harm if anything I said was wrong or mispronounced. Take care of yourself, and we'll see you in the next episode.